The stars wept. Great plumes of celestial fire unraveled across the void, as if the heavens themselves mourned the loss of something ancient, something holy. From the dying embers of the Horus heresy to the endless wars of damnation that followed, there drifted a single vessel, silent, bleeding, and forgotten, the Conqueror. So, before we begin this dark journey together, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into the Star Wars lore. I noticed that about 98.5% of you watching are not subscribe button, and hitting that subscribe button really helps the channel grow and lets me bring you more of these epic tales if you're hungry for even more Star Wars lore and want to explore other corners of this waste galaxy. Definitely check out my channel. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from and what time is it there. There's something magical about knowing we're all connected across different time zones, sharing these stories together under the same stars. Now get comfortable. Dim those lights, maybe turn on your fan for that gentle background sound. Wrap yourself in your blanket and let's journey into the shadows of Thew Old Republic together. Once the pride of the 12th Legion, now a tomb, a drifting mausoleum in orbit over a nameless world, its hull cracked and scarred with the memories of unending war. No transmissions escaped it, no life stirred within it, and yet something endured. Inside the primary stasis chamber, frozen mid-motion in a vault of flickering light, floated the figure of Kharn, he who had once led the charge at Terra's walls, he who had once shouted war cries beside Angron himself, he who had murdered more brothers than most men had ever known. And yet here he was motionless, preserved in the cold embrace of machine and silence, suspended between death and rebirth. The butcher's nails, those cursed implants that screamed and burned inside the skulls of every world eater, had long gone quiet in his mind. Where once there had been agony, now there was void. You see, dear listener, this is not the tale of a berserker. Not yet. This is the tale of a son, broken, wandering, and abandoned by gods and fathers alike. And as you rest beneath your stars tonight, know that you are not alone. We tell these stories because we truly love and care for you. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. The Conqueror drifted like a bloated carcass in the cold void. Once, its hull had roared with chain blades and cursed hymns. Now, only the groan of stressed metal answered the silence. Dust lay thick over blood-slicked floors. The shrines to Khârn were shattered or abandoned. In some places, the walls had been scorched clean, as if something had tried to erase memory itself. But within the heart of the ship, something stirred. Warning glyphs flashed weakly on a cogitator node beside the stasis vault. A stuttering whine rose in the darkness. Power systems, half devoured by the warp's corruptive reach, stammered back into life, and the field holding Kharn flickered. Once, twice, then failed. With a hiss, the vault opened. Kharn dropped heavily to the deck. His armor, still marked in red and brass, was dulled, scorched and cracked. Dried blood caked his gauntlets. He did not roar. He did not speak. He simply breathed. One breath, two. Then came the silence. His mind was empty. The nails no longer howled. The pressure in his skull, once constant, divine agony, was gone. And with its absence came something worse. Memory. He staggered through the dark halls, limping at first, then dragging himself upright. Everywhere, the dead lay thick. Some had fallen with weapons in hand. Others, huddled in corners, eyes wide with madness. Most bore the marks of their own brothers. The final red feast had been devoured long ago. Kharn moved among them like a ghost. He remembered each face. "Delvarus," he whispered, kneeling beside a warrior with shattered tusks and a split skull. "You spoke against Angron once. I broke your jaw." He touched the corpse's pauldron. It bore no legion markings, only scorched brass. Brotherhood erased. He found the shattered remnants of Gorechild, his chain axe, beside the corpse of a helmsman embedded in the man's spine. He tore it free without a word. The blade sputtered, teeth worn, but still hungry. Deeper into the Conqueror he wandered, past shrines of skulls, past the quarters where the nails had once been implanted in fresh recruits. He passed the central chamber where Angron had once held court. Now hollow, the throne cracked down its center. At last, he came to the viewing deck. Glass long fractured, fields just barely holding back the void. And there he saw it. The stars, not in glory, but in retreat. Where once the galaxy had been aflame with the banners of rebellion, now only ruin remained. He felt no victory in it, no triumph. The heresy had ended long ago. Terror still stood. Horus was dead. And Angron, he did not know, did not care. He raised his faceplate, breathing in the stagnant air. He was tired, not from battle, but from the weight of memory. He recalled Latara's voice, sharp, commanding, the Conqueror's mistress. Where was she now? Her command throne was empty. Had he killed her? Had someone? He looked down at his gauntlet. There was old blood beneath the plating, not dried but blackened by time. Too much blood to remember, too many names. He looked out again. The warp shimmered beyond the hull, pulsing like a wound in reality. But even the warp seemed quieter, more watchful. Then, deep within himself, he felt it. A tremble. Not fear, not rage, but purpose. He was still alive. The nails were silent. The gods had not come to claim him. Why? He placed Gorechild across his shoulders, stepping into the half-light. And he understood. If silence reigned, then he would be the storm. If memory endured, then he would carve it anew. He would find the truth behind his father's absence, behind the betrayal of his brothers, and he would offer skulls, not for redemption, but for reckoning. Khârn the Betrayer was not yet a monster, but he was beginning to remember why he became one. There is a moment between war and memory, a breath, a whisper, a weight that settles not upon the body, but the soul. Khârn moved through the Conqueror's decks like a revenant torn loose from time. The air stank of oil, dried blood, and the quiet rot of forgotten corpses. The ship had once thrummed with rage, a living extension of Angron's will. Now it groaned beneath its own inertia, drifting through the stars like a monument to a god that had stopped listening. He passed through the medici decks. Clean once. Now. Carnage. Tables overturned. Restraints torn from iron. Bones scattered like cards in a gambler's fury. Even the apothecarian's servo skulls hung slack in the air, their optics long since darkened. In one corner, a mass of armor, crimson and brass, hulking and headless, was frozen mid-motion, half fused to the bulkhead. A name was etched in high Gothic on the shoulder plate. Kharn Varn. Once a warrior, now just another ruin. Kharn stood over him in silence. His eyes traced the lines of impact, the cracks in the ceramite, the way the arm had reached, not to kill, but to hold off something unseen. Was this where the Legion fell? Not in battle, but in madness. He placed a hand on the ruined helm. A quiet moment, a rare one, and then softly, "Forgive me." The nail still did not stir. The bridge was in shadow when he entered. No lights flickered. No commands barked. The command throne was empty. Latara's throne. He remembered her. Red hair, sharp eyes, a voice like steel honed to a whisper. She had ruled the Conqueror with a precision that made Astartes hesitate. Mortal, and yet untouchable. He sat in her chair. It was too small for his bulk, yet it felt heavier than any weapon. He imagined her fingers dancing over the command runes, issuing kill orders without fear, navigating through void storms with the calm of one who had nothing left to lose. And now there was nothing. He reached for the command console. Sparks hissed. The screen flickered into life, static chewing through dying systems. A faint red rune blinked on the display. Auto-record memory vault 149-X date. Corrupted status. Playback damaged. Begin. YN. He pressed Y. At first there was only static. Then Latara's voice. Fragmented, distorted. Khârn, if you find this, don't come back. They tore each other apart. You were the last. I sealed the bridge. I tried. He wouldn't stop. The Primarch, he lost all reason. Not even you could have reached him. Please, if there's anything left of you, don't let him take you too. The feed ended. Not with a scream, not with static. Just silence. Khârn didn't move, didn't breathe for a moment. The nails should have ignited. Pain should have ripped through his skull like an iron storm. But nothing came. Only a growing pressure, an ache, not in his spine, but in something deeper. A voice, not from outside, from within. Where is your father, little butcher? He turned. No one was there. The voice had not spoken aloud. It was memory, echo, the kind that worms its way behind the eyes and asks questions you can never answer. Khârn stood. He could not remain in the past, not now. He made for the lower decks, the war bays. If the ship could still move even limp, he would make it do so. He would find answers. New Syria, perhaps, or beyond. If Angron lived, he would face him. If not, then Khârn would become something else. As he descended, the Conqueror shifted, not violently, but like a beast stirring in its sleep. The warp engines coughed back to life. The Vox arrays wailed with interference, howling static like a pack of wolves at the edge of memory. He passed through the gladiator cages. Once, these decks had roared with the sound of blade and chain. Astartes training against one another in blood duels, stoking their rage for Angron's pleasure. Now they were empty. The cages were open. The locks broken from within. On one wall, scratched deep in the iron, were words. Not written low Gothic or tribal glyphs, but something older. A tongue that the butcher's nails had once silenced. Khârn stared at it for a long time. Then came the noise. Not metal, not warp, laughter. Behind him. He spun, Gorechild half raised, but there was no one there. Only the open gate of Cage 7, where they once held the worst of the berserkers. Men broken beyond rage, who howled even in sleep. Khârn stepped inside. In the center of the cage lay a helm, scorched black, shaped like a skull. Its visor jagged from ancient impacts. It pulsed faintly in the dim light, as if still alive. He picked it up. And then, without warning, the nails roared. Not pain, but memory. Visions flooded him. Angron standing atop a mountain of corpses laughing. Brothers dying in silence. Latara weeping blood in the bridge. A throne of skulls stretching into the horizon. He dropped the helm, fell to his knees. His mouth opened. No words came. Only breath. Only the sound of blood in his ears. The Conqueror shuddered around him, as if exhaling. Khârn rose slowly, clutching the helm. The nails were alive again, but different, sharper, focused. They no longer demanded slaughter. They whispered a name, not Khârn, not Angron, but his own. Kharn. He stood upon the hangar deck, helm in hand, armor lit red by warning lights. The ship's engines began to warm. The warp drives bled violet light. A course had been entered. He had not entered it. Somewhere, something waited. Nuceria, or something wearing its skin. He looked out into the void. The nails did not scream. They sang. In the black stillness between stars, the conqueror moved like a ghost, her engines shedding trails of light that shimmered and twisted in ways reality was not meant to witness. Warp and void converged around her, not as navigational hazard, but as ritual. The ship was not traveling, it was returning. And in its core, Kharn stood motionless in the strategium, surrounded by the shadows of the past. The helm, brass, scarred, and shaped in the likeness of a skull, rested in his gauntleted hands. It was not forged by mortal hands, nor crowned by accident. It pulsed with memory. It remembered pain. Kharn stared at it, the nails behind his eyes whispering once more, no longer in agony, but in clarity. Images bled across his vision. A ring of chains, a red-lit arena, a father roaring through shattered teeth, a son kneeling beneath the blood of his brothers, and deeper still, something older. A voice, not heard, but felt. "Do you remember who you were, Kharn?" He turned to face the bridge once more. The crew pits were empty now. The few remaining servitors were inert, fused to their stations by old gore and rust. But from the shadows, others had begun to gather. Survivors, 6, maybe 7. World eaters all, but none wore their colours proudly. Their armour was scorched, ragged, their legion markings scraped away by time and shame. The one who stepped forward removed his helm. His face was gaunt, hollow-eyed, a scar stretching from cheekbone to throat, a long-healed wound from a chain blade. "Kharn," he rasped, voice hoarse like old parchment. Kharn did not speak. "You came back," the warrior said. Kharn's voice was dry. When he spoke, it sounded more like stone than man. "I never left." The warrior, Kargos, once a sergeant of the 45th, nodded slowly. "We thought you were dead." The others turned on each other. The nails. Something broke. We stopped hearing the call. We stopped feeling it. "And yet, here you stand," Kharn said. "Not to follow." Not again. He gestured behind him at the others, whose weapons remained holstered, for now. Kharn looked at them, then past them, toward the slowly swirling image of their destination now appearing in the void. A planet, not labelled on any surviving chart, but unmistakable. Nuceria. The nail screamed again, not in rage, in memory. They broke orbit in silence, no fanfare, no cries to Khârn, just the groaning of ancient engines and the whisper of the past pulling them downward. As the dropship tore through Nuceria's ruined skies, Kharn stared down at the world that had birthed and butchered him, his father's home, his crucible. Nuceria had been a world of dualities, golden spires for the elite, blood-soaked pits for the enslaved, a world that had worshipped spectacle and fed on suffering. Now it was dead. Entire continents were scorched, oceans boiled into steam. The surface bore the scars of exterminatus, scars given not by the Imperium, but by Angron himself. He had burned his own past from the galaxy, and yet something remained. Kharn stepped from the landing ramp into red dust. The air was thin, unclean. Ash fell like snow. Great skeletal colosseums jutted from the horizon, half collapsed, blackened by orbital fire. And beneath his boots, bones shifted, thousands of them. Kargos followed, keeping his distance. "You remember this place?" he asked. Khârn said nothing. He walked forward, boots crunching over the skeletal remains of generations. His eyes drifted to the distant plateau, the one where Angron had once killed his masters, where his rebellion had begun. It was there Khârn went. The climb was slow, ritual, as if each step carried the weight of memory up from the earth itself. The sky above swirled with warp-tainted clouds, and yet Khârn's mind was clearer than it had ever been. No orders, no sermons, just the sound of dust and wind and the nails whispering. At the summit, the pit awaited, the same arena where Angron had fought his last battle as a slave. Khârn dropped to one knee at the center. The dust tasted like iron. The helm still pulsed in his hands. Visions returned, not of glory, not of conquest, but of chains, of young boys thrown into pits with knives and left to die, of overseers laughing from their gilded towers. And in the center of it all, Angron, bleeding, screaming, alone. Khârn whispered, "Father." The sky cracked, lightning forked above, without thunder. A presence descended, not a voice, not a god, but a weight. The air turned heavy, like the moment before a blade strikes, and then Khârn heard it, a heartbeat, but not his own. It came from the helm. He raised it, and for a moment, just a breath, he saw him. Angron, not the demon, not the Primarch, but the gladiator, the son, young, angry, crying in silence. Then it was gone. The presence receded. Khârn stood slowly. Behind him, Khargos and the others watched, unsure whether to kneel or run. Khârn turned to face them, held the helm aloft, and spoke. The war never ended. The silence is only waiting. But I remember now. He placed the helm upon his head. The nails ignited. But it was not pain. It was purpose. They walked back to the dropship in silence. No war cry, no chaos chant, only the red dust and the wind. But as they ascended toward the waiting conqueror, something had changed. The survivors did not question. They did not cheer, but they followed. And Khârn, he did not smile, did not shout, but the helm, the crown, was now part of him. Nuteria had given birth to two things: a son who had never known love, and a father who had only known rage. Both were dead now, and in their place walked something new. They burned low over Nuceria's ruins, the drop craft rattling with old wounds and rusted silence. The stars above offered no comfort, only cold indifference. Khârn stood at the forward hatch, the brass helm heavy on his skull, the crown of skulls. Not a name yet, but a shape forming in the shadows of his mind. He did not speak, not to Khargos, not to the remnants of the warband, not to the dead world below. In his silence, they saw direction. In his stillness, they imagined purpose. The dropcraft touched down amidst black glass plains, once an ocean, now hardened lava scarred by orbital fire. Buildings jutted out at angles impossible to map. One half-sunken spire still bore a sigil, scorched near to nothing, but Khârn recognized it. The House of Chains, a noble estate, home to the slavers who once owned him. It should not have still stood, yet here it was, buried neck-deep in the world's own grave. Khârn disembarked, alone. The descent into the structure was steep. Sections had collapsed, twisting once majestic halls into jagged mazes of metal and charred remains. Yet Khârn knew the path, not from memory, but from instinct. The nails thrummed in his mind like a distant war drum, not screaming, not commanding, but echoing. Downward he walked, the air growing thick with the scent of ash and memory. And there, in a vault far below the earth, he found it, the pit. the very one he had bled in as a child, where broken boys were thrown into darkness, armed with rusted blades and forced to fight for food. He remembered the taste of dust and blood, the ring of bone on stone, the hollow silence when the crowd did not cheer. He knelt. The floor was cracked now, webbed with time, but it remembered him, and so did something else. From the corner of the room came a scraping sound. Kharn rose, Gorechild humming in his grip. A figure emerged, not demonic, not Astartes, a man, or what was left of one, old, skeletal, skin like stretched parchment. His eyes were sunken and blind, yet locked on Kharn with unholy certainty. "I was waiting for you," the man croaked. Kharn did not lower his weapon. "You should be dead." "I am," the man said, "and yet you're still here. So what does that make you?" Kharn stepped closer. "Name yourself." "I had many. In the pits, I was called the Bone Keeper. I cleaned what you made dirty. I gathered what you left behind." Kharn paused. The name meant nothing, but the tone, soft, distant, knowing, felt like a thorn in his chest. "I remember you," the old man said. "You were not the strongest, not the fastest, but you survived. You watched. Even when the crowd screamed for blood, you held it. You waited. I waited for him," Kharn said. "Your father?" Kharn's grip tightened. "My Primarch. Same thing, isn't it?" The old man smiled, his lips cracked like ancient leather. Kharn did not respond. "I remember the night he killed them all," the Bone Keeper whispered. "The lords, the nobles, the chains came down, the city burned. We wept in the ashes, not in sorrow." In awe, Kharn nodded slowly. "That was the last time I saw him human." The Bone Keeper tilted his head. "And what are you now?" Kharn turned. He didn't answer. The old man's voice followed. "Do you think he remembers you?" Kharn stopped. Then, without turning, he spoke. "It doesn't matter. I remember him." Outside, the wind picked up. Ash curled through the air like incense. The others waited at the landing site, their expressions blank, unreadable. Kharn returned alone, stepping from the shadows as if summoned by the very ground. They did not ask what he'd found. They knew better. Instead, they followed as he walked past them, toward the edge of the Black Plain, toward the spires of the old slave cities now bent and broken into the soil. He walked until he found the last thing left standing. A statue, cracked, half-toppled, Angron. Cast in bronze, his face twisted in eternal fury, arms chained, mouth open in an endless scream. Kharn stood before it, eyes narrow. He remembered the first time he saw it as a boy, freshly ascended to Astartes, still human enough to feel pride. They had cheered back then, worn his sigil like flame, called themselves the Sons of Angron. Now there was no one left. He stepped forward, raised Gorechild, and in one blow shattered the statue's face. The pieces fell like teeth. Khargos stepped beside him. "Why?" Kharn answered without looking. "Because it wasn't him." Khargos tilted his head. "Then who was it?" Kharn turned to face the others. "A ghost." They returned to the Conqueror. The warp engines breathed softly, waiting. Kharn removed his helm, not out of reverence, but exhaustion. He stood before the ship's command altar and placed the skull helm atop it, a symbol, a warning. Then at last, he spoke. "We are not here to remember. We are here to become." The others lowered their heads, not in worship, not in obedience, but in understanding. Kharn looked to the stars. "Set course for Molagtor," he said. "Why there?" Khargos asked. Kharn's eyes narrowed. "Because it bleeds." Molagtor was never meant to bear life. It was a death world long before it earned the name. Its surface, a cauldron of black wind, tectonic fury, and volcanic rivers that bled molten hate. The storms there did not howl. They screamed like the lungs of a wounded god. Few had charted its surface. Fewer still had returned. But Kharn did not come seeking life. He came seeking suffering. The conqueror tore free of the warp above the churning world, its hull creaking like the ribs of a leviathan dragged into the light. From the command throne, Khargos gazed upon the world with unease. Readouts fluttered, rad bleeds, geoquakes, soul flux anomalies, and worse still, psychic readings that spoke in tongues not even the word-bearers could catalogue. Kharn stood still, unblinking, listening. The nails were louder now, not screaming but singing, in strange asymmetrical pulses that mirrored the warp tides below. "What draws us here?" asked Khargos, voice low. Kharn's voice was even lower. "Pain." They descended into the maelstrom with burn-retardant plating hissing and buckling. Fire and sky mixed into a molten haze. The landing was rough, half-controlled, half-crash. Steel shrieked against rock. When the ramp fell open, it was as if they'd torn a wound in the planet's skin. And from that wound came voices, thousands of them, not screaming, whispering, a choir of agony. The warband faltered. Khargos clutched his head. This world is alive. Kharn stepped forward into the storm. The landscape was madness. Obsidian ridges twisted like broken fingers clawing toward the void. Great bones jutted from the earth. Colossal things, remnants of beasts or gods long dead, now calcified and fused with the stone. Rivers of magma pulsed beneath the surface like veins. And in the distance, something rose. A desert spire, not built, but grown. Twisting into the sky in impossible angles, etched in runes that defied physics. It pulsed like a heart. That was where Kharn walked. With every step, the whispers grew louder, clearer. They were not demonic, not human. They were memories, screamed through time, of gladiators crucified for rebellion, of cities sacrificed to false gods, of entire planets burned because a single voice cried no. Mollak Tor remembered every wound. It wore trauma like a skin. And Kharn listened. At the base of the spire, a circle of monoliths stood. They were carved from black stone and wrapped in chains, each one inscribed with languages older than Terra. And nailed to them were the bodies of space marines, still twitching, still alive. Not Astartes of the 13th or 17th. These were lost sons, warriors that had vanished during the scouring, thought dead in warp storms or betrayal. But here they were, crucified not by blades, but ideas. As Kharn approached, one opened its eyes. They were clouded, ancient, but they saw him. "You, hear it too," the warrior croaked. "What is this place?" Kharn asked. "A tomb, a truth, a mirror." The sky thundered. The spire above them pulsed. Energy bled down its sides, seeping into the ground. The monoliths shook, and the whispers became words. "You are not his son. You are not his legacy. You are his failure." Kharn closed his eyes. He saw Angron roaring on New Syria. He saw him again, broken at Armatura. Again at Terra, screaming as the nails overran what little of him was left. "You cannot save him," the whispers said, "but you can end what he began." Kharn stepped forward and pressed his gauntlet to the base of the spire. Visions hit him like knives, armies torn apart, skulls stacked higher than cathedrals, a crimson tide swallowing stars, and in the center of it all, himself, crowned not in gold, but in bone and rust. A god of murder, a saint of slaughter, not Khorn's champion, but his embodiment. not the echo of Angron, the end of him. Kharn screamed, not in rage, in clarity. Behind him, the crucified Astartes wept. "It is coming," one whispered. Khârn turned, the wind wrapping around him like a shroud. "What is?" "You, becoming." The warband watched from afar, afraid to step closer. And then, without ceremony, the spire cracked. Blood, not magma, erupted from its sides, cascading across the ground like a tide. The monoliths shattered. The crucified marine screamed and disintegrated into ash. And at the center of it all stood Kharn. Changed. He did not roar. He did not laugh. He merely looked skyward. The stars blinked. And somewhere deep in the warp, something ancient turned its gaze toward Moloch Tor, toward him. Later, aboard the Conqueror, Kargos approached him. "We lost 20 during the quake," he said. "The warp is unstable. Should we pull back?" Kharn looked at the skull helm resting beside him. "No," he said. "Then what now?" Khârn's eyes were distant, focused on something unseen. "We go to Scalathrax." Kargos stiffened. "That world is cursed." "Good," Khârn said, rising. "Then we'll fit right in." Scalathrax was dead before they arrived. Not in the literal sense. Its atmosphere still held a toxic breath. Its ice-covered plain still cracked beneath falling ordnance. But something deeper had already perished there. A pact, a brotherhood, a soul. Once, this world had been a stronghold of the Imperium. Now, it was a graveyard. The world eaters descended upon it with blood on their minds and rot in their hearts. The siege had raged for months. The Emperor's children were there too, entangled in their own madness. Both legions, bitter reflections of fallen gods, now caught in a death spiral with no end. But Kharn had come not to fight a war. He had come to end one. The warband landed under a moonless sky, the ship's belly torn open to the howling wind. Ice scoured their armor. The ruins of ancient bastions jutted like broken teeth from the snow. And the air, it hissed with something unnatural. Scalathrax was always cold, but now it was colder than death, and it was silent. Too silent. Even Kargos, ever composed, found his fingers twitching over the bolt pistol at his hip. "This world is wrong," he murmured. "Even the warp recoils." Kharn disembarked without a word. The nails were quiet now, whispering, like a choir breathing in before the scream. They moved through the ruins of a city that had no name. Spires reduced to ribs. Hab blocks twisted into ash-choked catacombs. Every wall bore the scars of orbital fire and bolter rounds. And beneath it all, beneath the collapse and ruin, were bones. Millions of them. Not just soldiers, children, civilians. Entire generations extinguished, burned alive, left to freeze. This was not a war fought for territory. It had become something else, a ritual of decay. In the distance, thunder cracked, not from weather, but from weapons. The siege was still active in pockets. World eaters dug into trenches of madness. Emperor's children howled in twisted pleasure, launching symphonies of agony into the void. Once, they had bled together on Terra's walls. Now they bled each other. Kharn watched from a cliff of frozen ruin, his warband at his back. His breath steamed, not from cold, but from something deeper, like steam from a freshly wounded beast. And then, from below, came singing, twisted, beautiful, mocking. The Emperor's children were holding a shrine, one they had stolen from a local cult during the siege, a place once used to worship the Emperor, now a stage for Slaaneshi abominations. Kharn descended. The shrine was lit with pale fire. Inside, Astartes danced with demonettes, tearing captives apart in time with music. The floor was slick with blood. The walls pulsed like flesh. A symphony of horror rang through vox systems torn from fallen comrades. And at the center of it all, wearing armor laced with gold and violet, was Seraphan, a captain of the 3rd Legion. He turned to Khârn with a grin. "I heard you were coming," he purred. Khârn's axe was already in hand. The battle was not a duel. It was a butchery. Khârn moved like a storm breaking free of its cage. Seraphan laughed, danced, struck. But each blow was slower than the rage building in Khârn's soul. He parried, dodged, sang. But he could not stop destiny. The axe hit, and Seraphan screamed, not from pain, but from betrayal. "Why?" he gasped. "We were brothers." Khârn did not answer. He simply carved the heart from his chest and held it to the flame. Outside, the warband stood waiting. The wind howled, and then fire. The shrine erupted. Not from melter or bomb, but from Khârn himself. The blood ignited. The walls collapsed. Screams echoed through the valley like dying hymns. And from the fire walked Khârn the Betrayer. No longer a captain, no longer a son, but something worse, a prophet of wrath. A silence fell across the valley. The world eaters watching from afar stopped firing. The Emperor's children pulled back. The air changed. Khârn looked up at the sky and screamed. The sound was not rage, it was release. The rage had no place left to go. No walls, no orders, no gods. It tore free of him like a star shedding its shell, and the storm began. The ice cracked, the ground split, and the world eaters turned on each other. Some say it was chaos influence, others say it was fear. But those who were there remember the truth. They saw Khârn descend upon his own brothers, axe whirling, eyes blank, mind shattered by revelation. He did not strike with malice, he struck with purpose, to destroy what remained, to end the lie. They had followed Angron for centuries, followed the Legion, followed the war, but Khârn had found something deeper, a world where loyalty was the cage, where the rage itself was freedom. He gave them that freedom, one axe blow at a time. And then the fires began to spread. The entire planet ignited. A munitions cache exploded in the west. Warp storms opened in the east. Emperor's children retaliated. World eaters responded. Soon, what was once a siege became a massacre. Scalathrax burned, and the Legion died. Not in body, but in spirit. There would be no more unity, no more hierarchy, no more commands, only blood. And Khârn did not grieve. He walked into the snow as it turned to ash and laughed. Scalathrax was over, not by ceasefire, not by treaty, but because there was no one left to scream. The world eaters were broken, not by their enemies, but by themselves. Their loyalty was shattered in fire. Their unity was buried beneath frozen corpses. What remained was a silence far deeper than death. A silence Khârn did not flee from. He carried it. He wandered alone across the ashen wastes, his armor scorched and flaking, the chain-axe gore-child hanging at his side like a blood-drunk beast exhausted from its feast. His helm hung from his belt, one lens cracked, its brass gleaming with the firelight still burning behind him. There were no survivors to bury, no comrades to mourn, just emptiness. And yet, Khârn walked on. At times, voices echoed in the storm behind his eyes. The nails, half-sated, whispered half-memories. Fragments of Angron's wrath, Cargo's final warning, the face of Argel Tal. The moment Seraphan fell beneath his axe, these ghosts did not accuse. They simply were. each one a chain link broken, a connection lost, a weight unshouldered. Once he might have fought them. Now he welcomed them. For in their silence he found something purer than brotherhood, freedom. Some of the World Eaters followed him in the weeks after Skalathrax, not as a captain, not as a leader, but as a symbol, the betrayer, the flame that broke the chain. Khârn never told them to follow. He never told them to stop. He simply walked, from battlefield to battlefield, system to system, leaving trails of red ruin in his wake. His wrath became ritual. Each skull offered not as tribute, but as testimony. Each corpse a sermon in the gospel of rage. And in time, even Khârn began to listen. In the screaming deeps of the maelstrom, he fought for 6 days and 6 nights against an Eldar exarch, whose soul had been stitched into a living web of blades. Neither spoke, neither fled. In the end, it was Khârn, who emerged from the storm of monomolecular steel, arms hanging in strips, but eyes burning like twin suns. In the void fortress of the Morphean Shroud, he carved through a warband of rival traitor marines who had sworn themselves to despair. Their champion wept as he fought, blade trembling. Khârn answered not with mockery, but with mercy, granting him a death as swift as it was brutal. And on the world of Durnath 12, when a demon of Slaanesh tried to seduce his fury into silence, Khârn simply laughed and cleaved her in half. And with each offering, the winds of the warp howled louder. The blood god stirred, not in approval, but in hunger. And it was then that Khârn heard it, not with ears, not through the nails, but in his bones, a call, a summons, not from Angron, not from any mortal master, but from a place older than memory, deeper than the Eye of Terror, where the throne of skulls towered amidst an ocean of screaming blood, the brass citadel, the heart of Khârn's realm. Khârn did not hesitate. He did not fly there. He bled his way in. Each world he struck bled harder. Each kill resonated like a drumbeat. The warp grew, thinner around him, the veil weakening with every swing. Until one day, amidst a battle on a demon world that had no name, the sky simply ripped, and Khârn walked through it. The realm of Khârn was not beautiful. It was truth. Endless plains of bone and fire. Rivers of blood boiling with the ichor of titans. Mountains built from skulls. Mortal, immortal, God-born, and forgotten. The sky itself was a deep crimson, as if the stars had wept to death. And above it all, seated on a throne that stretched into infinity, the blood god. Khârn. He did not speak. He did not need to. His gaze was like gravity. And Khârn, blood-caked, battle-scarred, eyes wide with the joy of suffering, kneeled, not in servitude, but in acknowledgement, a warrior before a force older than time. The chain had been broken, but purpose remained. There, in the shadow of that throne, a demon approached him, a herald of Khârn. Clad in brass and flame, its voice like steel being drawn across bone. "You will be given the crown," it rasped. Khârn said nothing. "You will carry the mark of the betrayer until all the stars burn." Still he said nothing. "You will never know peace. You will never know rest. You will never die. Only battle until the end of all things." Khârn looked up at the mountain of skulls and smiled. "Then it is beginning." The demon placed a circlet of fused bone and bronze upon his brow. It was not a crown of glory, it was a weight, the crown of skulls. Each spike forged from a kill he had made, each rune an oath unspoken, and when it touched his skin, the warp screamed, time fractured, and across the galaxy, psychers wept blood, for Khârn the Betrayer had been crowned, not as king, not as warlord, but as Khorne's wrath made flesh, the perfect killer, the first of the Red Apostles, the prophet of the end. He rose, and the skies burned red. There are worlds where history turns, planets upon which the stars seem to lean closer, watching with breathless anticipation, as if the cosmos itself dares not blink. One such world is Armageddon, a name whispered in dread across 1,000 sectors. A forge world, a bastion, a graveyard, reborn in fire more times than records dare count. And it was here, amid the choking smoke of its third great war, that Khârn the Betrayer returned. Not in secret, not in silence, but like a red comet screaming through the void. The great war of Gazkulthraka had already plunged Armageddon into madness. Billions fought, bled, and burned in trenches that stretched across continents. The skies were black with soot. The oceans boiled. The hives were bastions of death and steel. But when the World Eaters arrived, there was no alliance, no pact with orcs, no purpose beyond slaughter. They fell from orbit like spears of fire, their drop pods slamming into battlefields already buried in corpses. They emerged, screaming, chain blades roaring, eyes gleaming with red fire. The blood god had sent his hounds not for conquest, but for tribute. Kharn led them at the head of a tide of brass and crimson. He had no banners, no vox commands, no formations. His war cry was simple and eternal, blood for the blood god, and every warrior who followed echoed it with ecstatic rage. He stormed the Hades Hive trenches first. Thousands of orcs were already clashing with Steel Legion troops when the World Eaters arrived. For a single heartbeat, both sides paused, staring into the smoke as a figure stepped from the fire. Armor cracked and pulsing with gore, a chain axe gripped in one gauntlet, a plasma pistol sparking like a dying star in the other. Khârn did not care for sides. He simply charged. The trenches were reduced to canals of gore. Steel Legion tanks fired upon the incoming berserkers and were torn apart by chain axes moments later. Orcs screamed with joy as they charged the Chaos Marines, only to be split open with even greater violence. Khârn killed without pause, moving through the battlefield like a living guillotine. He did not care whose blood spilled, only that it did. The Imperial Guard attempted to regroup. Colonel von Straub, long since tainted by arrogance, issued a direct order: fire upon all heretics, cleanse them in the Emperor's name. But Khârn had already reached the artillery lines. He tore through them like parchment. Basilisks became bonfires. Guardsmen became red mist. Commissars attempted summary execution of retreating soldiers, only to find themselves facing the betrayer. Khârn decapitated them mid-sentence. The guardsmen who survived did not flee. They knelt, for death had already come. Meanwhile, the orcs began to worship him. Some called him the kill god's favourite. Others simply screamed and followed, their own nobs beheaded by Khârn's axe in ritual challenge. To the greenskins, he was a force of such pure, undiluted violence that he transcended species. Ghazghkull himself took notice. The orc war boss, already waging a war of prophecy, considered Khârn a rival messenger of godhood. They met in the ashen wastes of Volcanus Hive. No words, just impact. Chain axe versus power claw. Flesh against armoured hide. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, both armies were scattered, reeling, awestruck. Khârn stood alone, his arm nearly severed, blood cascading down his chest. But Ghazghkul's skull was gone. Some say it still hangs from Khârn's belt. Others believe it was hurled into the warp as an offering. All agree the Wa faltered that day. In the depths of Armageddon's catacombs, amidst the whispering echoes of forgotten tombs, Khârn performed a ritual, not of sorcery, not of chaos, but of remembrance. He stood among skulls of enemies and allies and began to carve runes into the stone with Gorchild's teeth. The runes bled, and from them poured forth visions. Visions of the long war, of the Black Crusade to come, of terror burning beneath a sky of brass, of the final offering where even gods might fall. And the blood god watched. Khârn did not weep, but in that moment a tithe was accepted, a tithe greater than worlds, the tithe of Khârn's soul, offered again and again, never asking for rest, never seeking peace, only battle eternal. As the world eaters withdrew, they left behind a world reeling from madness. The Imperium called it a miracle that the orcs fell back, but the survivors whispered the truth behind closed vox lines. The heretic slew the beast, and in that brief, blood-stained lull, Khârn the Betrayer faded into the void once more, not defeated, not forgotten, simply waiting for the next scream in the dark. In the frigid night of history, there are screams that never fade, and there is one world, forgotten by the galaxy, where a scream tore the world eaters in two, where a single night buried a legion in frost, fire, and madness. The world was called Scalathrax, an unremarkable rock at the edge of a dying star, yet it would become sacred to the blood god, because this was where the world eaters were broken, by Khârn. Scalathrax had no cities, no secrets, only bloodless war, an endless siege between the Emperor's children and the world eaters, where trenches were dug and abandoned, and red snow drank the warmth of traitor blood. For years, the two corrupted legions fought, not for victory, but because they had to. They were bound by ancient hatred, by rivalry that stretched back to the days of Horus. The world eaters blamed the Emperor's children for their excess. The Emperor's children blamed the world eaters for their ruin. Khârn cared for neither. He had grown restless. He wandered the frozen trenches like a spectre, slaying his foes without effort, and eyeing his own brothers with growing disgust. They had grown soft, he said, soft behind their hatred, soft behind their excuses, soft behind the whispers of demons and dainty ritual. He called them cowards, he called them dead already, and still they fought without meaning. The gods watched in boredom until the storm came. It began with a wind, one that howled across the blood-choked waste like a predator. The temperature fell, the ice cracked, and Scalathrax entered permanent night. The wind rose until it screamed. Flesh split open in the cold, bolters jammed, chain axes froze in place, and Khârn, he laughed. He turned to his fellow world eaters and shouted through the storm, "We are warriors of blood, and yet you cower like mortals from the cold." None answered. They stayed in their bunkers, their pits, their tunnels, refusing to die, refusing to fight. Khârn stood alone in the blizzard, his breath steaming, armor cracking with frost. Then he raised Gorchild and did the unthinkable. He began to burn the shelters, one by one, the dugouts, the bunkers, the trenches where his brothers cowered. He set them alight with flamer and blade, screaming, "Cowards do not deserve the blood god's favor." The legion tried to stop him, but none could stand before his fury. He killed them, all of them, brother after brother. He turned on his own. The World Eaters howled in horror, but it was too late. The fires rose across the wastes. Black smoke swallowed the snow, and the heat brought the Emperor's children running, sensing the ecstasy of death. They did not find a legion. They found a butcher, drenched in the blood of his kin, eyes burning with something beyond rage. Kharn slaughtered them too. He tore through the sons of Fulgrim like parchment, howling with ecstatic purity. No orders, no war council, no retreat, only death. By morning, the war was over. There was no victory. No side remained whole. The World Eaters were shattered. The Emperor's children scattered. The gods looked down. And Khârn smiled. For at last, the false bonds of brotherhood were broken. And in their place, only devotion remained. Kharn collapsed, eventually, frozen solid, surrounded by corpses of friend and foe. His armor locked, his heart still. They say he died that night. But Khârn is not a god of rest, and death, for Kharn, would become a cycle. The surviving World Eaters gathered what few remained. They feared him, worshipped him, and dared not bury him. Instead, they sealed him in a dread vault aboard their flagship, a crypt of iron and silence. They called it the Chamber of Chains, and they said, "Let him sleep. Until we need him again, they would need him, again and again, in battles where rage must outshine strategy, where blood must drown logic, where gods must feast." Kharn became their blade, their curse, their final answer. And somewhere, deep in the warp, the crown of skulls grew heavier. Another world burned, another god fed, and Khârn the Betrayer became more than a man. He became a symbol, a warning, a relic of holy ruin. Skalathrax was forgotten by maps, but not by memory, for every World Eater knows that was the night when Brotherhood died, and Kharn was reborn. There are chains in this galaxy that cannot be broken, and there are others that can never hold. In the bowels of the World Eater's warship, beneath steel, bone, and prayer, Khârn the Betrayer slept, or so they believed, not dead, not alive, somewhere between fury and oblivion, in a tomb of iron engraved with runes of blood binding and Khârn's eightfold hate. Kharn was bound, by chain, by ritual, by the last fearful oaths of a legion that had betrayed itself. And yet, even in silence, he was listening. The warp whispered, the blood god dreamed, and so did he. Time passed strangely for the World Eaters. They fought where the galaxy bled, where rebellion bloomed like tumours across the Imperium's skin. They no longer marched in legions. They hunted, like hounds off the leash. But without Kharn, they were unmoored, directionless. The Primarch Angron had vanished again, drawn deeper into the eye of terror, his mind dissolving further into the warp. The captains squabbled, the warbands fractured. They argued over leadership, over offering, over which skulls were worthy to collect, but none had his voice, none had his fury, and so, like the old priests of terror once did, they turned to the tomb of their saint. The vault was cold when they entered, blackened with soot, echoing with hollow resonance. At its centre, suspended by chains thicker than a man, hung the corpse of Kharn. He did not move. He had not moved in centuries. But his body showed no decay, no dust, only dried blood, hardened like rust over ancient ceramite. Astartes gathered before him, whispering through vox filters. Some bowed, others recoiled. They feared what would happen if he woke. but they feared more what would happen if he didn't. It was during the siege of Gelunhive that they broke the seals. A city of 1 billion souls stood defiant. The World Eaters could not breach it. The walls were too high, the defenders too faithful. They needed a weapon, a curse. They offered blood. They carved the eightfold path into the skin of prisoners, and they opened the tomb. The chains snapped like bone under hammer. The runes ignited. The vault screamed. And from the void of silence came a single breath, like a furnace being stoked. Kharn's eyes opened, red, not with light, but with purpose. He stepped down from the air as though gravity obeyed him, said nothing, took up Gorechild, still buried in the frozen corpse of a brother. The axe purred as it woke. Kharn said only one word: skulls. The warbands scattered before him, scrambling to follow, like moths behind a comet of fire. Gelunhive did not fall. It was torn apart. Kharn walked through its walls like paper. He did not give orders. He did not lead. He was the storm. And the World Eaters followed him, not out of loyalty, but because to fall behind was to be left behind, and to be left behind was to die. The defenders of Gelunhive were brave. They had trained for years, studied doctrine, built layered defense grids. None of it mattered. Kharn did not fight like a man. He fought like an extinction event. Plasma fire melted from his armor. Explosives turned to ash before reaching him. The last Vox recording spoke only of screaming, of chain axes singing, of one man drenched in red, moving like a demon among the living. He did not care who they were. He did not care what they believed, only if they could die. Lan chilanti atidi. After 3 days, the city was gone. Not conquered, gone. Its defenders pulped, its civilians offered, its spires reduced to rubble soaked in marrow. The World Eaters cheered, some wept, others carved runes into their own skin, hoping to be noticed by the god they had just served. But Kharn, he stood on the highest ruin, looked up at the blood-coloured sky, and did not smile, because there were not enough skulls. There would never be enough. He returned to the ship, to the vault. The World Eaters watched from a distance, unsure what to say, and Kharn, still spattered in steaming gore, walked into the tomb again, and sat, not in chains, not in silence, but in waiting. Some say he returns there after every war, that the Chamber of Chains is no longer a prison, but a sanctuary, a place where the rage can cool just enough to be used again, like a blade dipped in ice before returning to flame. Kharn's path had begun, not with ambition, not with command, but with need, the need to end cowardice, to remove hesitation, to offer purity through annihilation. He was not Angron, he was not a Primarch, not a leader, but he was more feared than either, because while the gods whispered, Kharn acted. He became a legend, an omen, a blade that would be wielded again and again, and though his name became a curse across Imperial space, the World Eaters knew it as a prayer. Kharn, awake. Let blood flow. Let silence break. And the Chamber of Chains would tremble once more. There comes a time in every warband when the hunger outweighs the cause, when purpose is eclipsed by madness, when the warriors forget why they fight, only that they must fight. The World Eaters had long since crossed that threshold. In the aftermath of Gelunhive's extinction, the war bands multiplied like tumours. Splinter fleets shattered into fragments, each lord claiming they alone were chosen by Kharn's reawakening. And Khârn, he said nothing. He gave no blessings. He took no throne. He simply left. Where he walked, they followed. But when he vanished, they turned on each other. The void between worlds became a hunting ground. Frigate battled frigate. Skull barges drifted silent and broken. Blood tied to Khârn by brother against brother. Kharn's silence was taken as challenge, a test of dominance, and each warband believed the answer was carved in the corpses of their kin. On the corpse world of Sarnet 5, the worst of it began. 3 captains landed at once, each claiming Kharn had sent them. Their warbands disembarked into frozen waste, red ceramite against white ash, blood against bone. They met in the cathedral ruins of an old ecclesiarchy bastion, and instead of the enemy, they found each other. No parley, no warning. Just the scream of chain blades and bolters lit like suns, Shrazam, Entespin Tilenti. Captain Droman the Scarlord had once been Kharn's second, or so he claimed. He wielded twin chain axes etched with the names of fallen champions, and wore a cloak of tan sister of battle skin. His warband screamed prayers in 8 tongues. They devoured the dead raw. Opposing him, Varnok the Vein Splitter led a cult of pain. Their nerves were exposed by choice. They fought unclad, welcoming every wound as communion. The third, Axion Gravetread, had no voice left. Only vox recorders that replayed Kharn's battle cries, looped eternally, even in silence. His warriors were called the Mute Choir. They met beneath the stained glass of a broken emperor and shattered it with the weight of their hatred. None would retreat, none would yield, for all had something to prove, that they were closest to the butcher, that they understood the path of skulls, that they were worthy of becoming more than echoes. The war lasted 11 days. The skies burned crimson with cannon fire. The snow boiled red from plasma bursts. Statues collapsed under the weight of dead Astartes, all of them sons of the same father. By the end, there were no victors, only piles of butchered gods. And Kharn arrived on the 12th. He walked alone, unannounced, through the dead, a comet of silence and disapproval. Not a word passed his lips. He entered the cathedral. The blood there was still warm. He kneeled, not to pray, but to scoop it in his palm and drink. Then he stood, turned to the few survivors, and spoke. This is not war. This is rot. The warbands fell to one knee, some in reverence, others in fear. And Kharn continued, We do not kill each other for sport. We do not waste skulls. You are not lords. You are not worthy. He raised Gorechild and pointed it to the horizon. There are still Imperials who breathe. Still worlds that deny the blood god. Kill them or be nothing. From that moment something shifted. The World Eaters did not become whole. They would never again be legion. But they remembered. They remembered the direction, the target, the enemy. Kharn was not a leader in name. He was a course correction, like a magnetic pull dragging iron through blood. Some left, those who thought themselves greater than the butcher. They would be hunted and skinned and left as warnings across the stars. The rest gathered again, war bands reforged into blades, not fractals, but weapons, each with a name, each with a purpose, each trailing behind the red wake of Khârn the Betrayer. And Khârn watched, not with affection. The blood god does not love, but with satisfaction. The path was narrowing. The offering was ripening. The galaxy trembled, and still there was not enough. Not enough blood, not enough bone, not enough screams. But soon, soon perhaps. In the quiet afterward, Khârn stood atop the cathedral ruins, the bones of false captains beneath his boots, and he whispered, almost to himself, "Skulls are not for you, they are for him." The wind howled, and Gorechild was hungry again. There is a difference between a leader and a symbol. A leader commands, a symbol compels. And Khârn, though he bore no title, no banner, and no legion standard, was compelling. He was the crownless king, the broken monarch of violence. And where he walked, the blood followed like tide water. They said he never slept. That rest was for the dead. That to dream was to show weakness. And Khârn was weaknessless. Even when his armor buckled with the dents of centuries, even when Gorechild's teeth grew dull with overuse, even when the rage subsided for a heartbeat, he endured. For what else could he do? To stop was to become mortal again, to remember the shame of Istvan, to see his brothers' faces, to feel the echoes of betrayal ricochet through a skull already broken. The war bands had stabilized, a kind of brutal stasis, no longer fracturing, but not united either. They followed his wake. Each battle became pilgrimage, each victory an offering, but not to Khârn, to him, the one who sits upon the brass throne of slaughter. And Khârn, he spoke little, only when the blood was fresh, when the rage was cooling in his veins, would he speak to the silence, to the nothing, or to someone only he could see. They were nearing Zaphan's gate, a cluster of warped bastions orbiting a dead sun. Imperial remnants had made a fortress there, faithful to the corpse emperor, clutching relics like children hold onto warmth. They prayed, they begged for salvation, and what came was him. Khârn led the assault personally, not from a command dais, not from a warship's bridge, but from the front, charging down shattered rockcrete with fire behind him. He wore no helmet, only the scars of 100 forgotten wars. The defenders were fanatics, the last of a dying crusade. They lit incense as their lungs collapsed, fired bolters even as blood drowned their vision, and still they broke, because you cannot pray away him. At the heart of Zaphan's gate stood a chapel palace, white marble veins twisting with gold and adamantine. Here resided Cardinal Helion, once a saint-elect, now a fossil of defiance. He stood robed in purple, a masterwork chainsword in hand, and a reductor slung across his back, for when the faithful fell and their gene seeds had to be claimed. He believed in sacrifice, he believed in duty, he believed in death. And when Khârn entered the hall, Helion did not kneel. He did not run. He smiled. The two warriors clashed in silence. Gorechild met Chainsword. Sacrament met savagery. Khârn fought with fury. Helion fought with belief. But belief shattered under the weight of rage. And in the end, the holy man screamed. Gorechild cleaved through his chest in a crescent arc, and when it was done, Khârn did not roar. He simply looked down, almost disappointed. "You knew you would die," he muttered, "but you didn't even make it hurt." He tore the cardinal's skull from the ragged sinew, placed it atop a pillar of broken icons, a new throne, not for himself, but for the crown. There was no ceremony, no declaration. But after Zaphan's gate, the war bands stopped testing him. They stopped whispering of succession. No longer did they ask who would rule, because Khârn already did, without ever wanting to. He was the crownless king, the walking avatar of a god who did not need avatars. He led not by word, but by wrath. Whispers grew in the eye. The thousand suns called him the Red Axis. The Black Legion marked his wake with planetary obituaries. Even the word-bearers paused, wondering if Khârn had become more than a vessel of rage. Had he become the rage itself? A vector, a contagion, a stormfront of violence with no end. And what did Khârn think of this? He stood atop the ruined chapel, the corpse of Hellion at his feet, and looked out upon the stars. There was no joy, no triumph, only the beating of a heart that refused to stop, only the crown he refused to wear, only the endless echoing whisper, skulls for the skull throne. And far above, in the brass-lit halls of the Imperium, Khârn watched. His silence was thunder, his approval murder, his favour death. And Khârn walked on, not because he was king, but because he could not stop. He had become the road, the blade, the judgment, a monarch without a throne, a king without a crown, but still the greatest of all his master's sons. There are wars that are fought for victory, others are fought for vengeance, and then there are those waged for no purpose but the act itself, where the fire of conflict is the prayer. This was not a crusade. It was not a rebellion. It was a pilgrimage of ash, of iron, of ruin. Led by no general, blessed by no high priest, Khârn's war bands marched not to conquer, but to witness. The worlds burned in sequence, one by one, each a pyre, each a hymn. They called it the Skull March. Feral planets were culled to silence. Hive worlds were made hollow. Forge worlds screamed in binary agony as their Mechanicus priests were impaled on cog blades. Even those who surrendered were offered no reprieve. There were no treaties, no pacts, only judgment. Khârn said little. He pointed, and the planet bled. His followers began to carry tomes of slaughter, blood-slicked parchment that catalogued death tolls like scripture. They did not write for memory. They wrote for worship. 30,000 on Varenza, 2 million on Kindreg's prime. 100,000 Astartes skulls gifted across the spiral of Calic. Every number was an offering, every massacre a sermon. On Intara, a shrine world known for its glowing cathedrals and floating basilicas, the ecclesiarchy prepared for a holy defense. Tens of thousands of sisters of battle, preachers armed with plasma rifles, living saints and martyr scribes. But what faith could stand against pure, undiluted hate? Khârn did not come with orbital strikes. He descended alone. The orbital picked recorders caught the moment. A red blur streaking through the storm clouds, trailing vaporized ice and burning debris. And when he landed amidst a congregation of 300 singing pilgrims, he did not speak. He butchered. The sisters met him in waves, 100 at a time. Meltagans, bolters, power swords. They struck him down 20 times. And 21 times he rose again. Not because of warp sorcery, not because of augmetics, but because death refused him. Khârn did not permit stillness. He was becoming, not a man, not even an Astartes, but an ideal. The final basilica burned for 43 days. Its spires crumbled like chalk. Statues of the emperor melted into weeping stone. The bones of martyrs became fuel for the fire. And Khârn stood atop its highest ruin, his armor blackened and steaming, and declared nothing, because there was nothing to say, only the wind and the endless howl of the warp. Among the warbands, something began to shift. The Blood Pact, the Butcher Sons, the Eightfold Scars. Even fragmented companies of fallen world eaters began to converge, not by order, but by instinct. They saw him not as a warlord, but as a conduit, a bleeding wound in real space through which Khârn himself could be felt. And so they came to the gash, a rift world, a reality fracture between the warp and the Imperium. There time bled sideways, mountains flowed like wax, and voices dripped from the skies like oil. It was holy ground, defiled, perfect, a gathering of the devout, an offering of the broken, a conclave of butchers. Here they would offer their skulls to him, to Kharn, not as sacrifice, but as recognition. A challenge was issued by warbringer Threx, once a champion of the Gorspear Rebellion, a demigod among traitor Astartes, 2 meters taller than Kharn, wielding twin demon hammers bound with the essence of a forgotten war god. He believed Khârn unworthy, a relic, an accident of the heresy. "You are no king," Threx roared before the massed warbands. "You are an echo. Let me silence you." The duel lasted 13 seconds. Gorichild shattered the first hammer. Kharn's fist crushed the second, and with a final sweep, he caved in Threx's ribcage, ripped out his second heart, and flung it into the warp rift. No words, only proof. The warbands fell silent. Even the demons paused in their slow coiling above the rift. In that silence, Khârn turned away. He had no throne, no crown, no desire to rule, but the warbands knelt all the same. And so the pilgrimage continued, not to gain territory, not to hold ground, but to leave nothing left to hold. Where they walked, faith turned to smoke. Where they marched, glory turned to ashes. Khârn did not lead them. He drew them forward, like a blade slicing open the galaxy, and Khârn smiled, silent, brutal, wide. For this was not a legion, it was not an army, it was a conviction made of rusted iron, forged in shame, sharpened by madness, and crowned with skulls. The galaxy bled, and the king walked on. There was once a name, spoken in reverence by warriors who stood unbroken in the face of the impossible. It echoed in the great crusade like a hymn made of steel. It rode beside the thunder warriors, walked in stride with the emperor, and carried the dreams of unity to the stars. The world eaters. But that name no longer meant brotherhood, no longer conjured banners or duty. Now it was a word scraped raw by madness, a memory bludgeoned into dust beneath the weight of Khârn's boot. And yet, not all had forgotten. Far from the gash, past the red haze storms that howled across the segmentum obscurus, a fleet drifted in silence. No cries of devotion, no screaming war bands, only the slow, melancholic drift of silence in vacuum, broken by ritual, by whispers, and by one iron voice. Captain Drevrak Kestor, last commandant of the 8th Retaliation Company, did not kneel, did not rage. He remembered. His men were few, 58 veterans, their butcher's nails long since removed, at great cost. Many had died in the process, some screaming, others grateful, but those who remained held to the memory, not of the nails, not of Angren's fury, but of the days before, when they were the warhounds, when justice was still something they believed in. They drifted aboard the Voltrek's Requiem, a battle barge too proud to die, covered in rusted hull plating and patched with salvaged bones, a ship that wept in its corridors and sang lullabies through broken Vox receivers. And in its heart stood a shrine, not to the Emperor, not to Khârn, but to remembrance, the names of lost brothers carved into the walls in High Gothic, one for every life they could recall, a cathedral of guilt. Kester read them often, before battle, after purging, even in sleep. He was haunted by their eyes. The men he had led during the heresy, the ones who fell to rage, the ones he had killed when they lost control. He bore their memory like a chain, not of shame, but of duty. The galaxy no longer wanted them. Chaos rejected them. The Imperium hunted them, and so they wandered. But the warp has no patience for ghosts. A message came, not through Vox, not by signal, but carved into the hull of an ancient derelict probe drifting near the Sorrow Belt. Just one word, gouged 1,000 times with impossible precision. Kharn. It struck like thunder in the hearts of the Retaliation Company. They had thought him dead, thought him lost beneath the weight of Khârn's hunger. But the reports grew undeniable. A red-armoured warrior cleaving through sanctified legions. A blade called Gorechild reaping millions. And behind him, the trail of a dying Imperium. Kester sat alone for 7 hours before he summoned the War Council. There were arguments, fists slammed into ceramite tables. Some called it suicide, others called it justice. But Kester spoke last. He was our brother. Before the blood, before the nails. And if he walks now as a god of slaughter, then we owe it to him to remind him what he was before he forgot. We owe it to ourselves. We are the last who remember. So they turned their course, a dying relic of a chapter, flying toward a storm. They did not carry purity seals. They did not sing litanies. They prepared for a confrontation that would likely end in their obliteration. But still, they came. It was on the dead forge moon of Galanterax, where iron rains fell from the sky like tears, and the air tasted of molten blood, that they found him. Kharn stood at the center of a crater that once held a manufactorum the size of a city. He was surrounded by the remains of 5 Titan legios. The wreckage still twitched. The Retaliation Company landed in silence. 58 against a god. 58 men without hate. Kharn turned. His eyes were not those of a beast. They were empty, not hollow, but tired, as if beneath the armor and the gore a fragment still remembered being human. Kester approached alone, helmet off, gaze level. "Do you remember me, brother?" A silence like gravity. Then, a rasping breath from beneath Kharn's helm. "I remember. The name." They stood there, war incarnate, and the last loyal son. Kester did not draw a weapon. He placed something at Kharn's feet. A nameplate, iron, scorched, old. "Before the heresy, before the madness, you saved me on Carthage Reach. You told me, hold fast. Rage is a weapon, not a master. You taught me that, before the god of skulls stole it from us." Kharn stared at the nameplate for 1 heartbeat, then 2, then 9, and then he turned away, said nothing, and walked into the dust storm. The warbands following him made no move to strike. They parted, they watched. Even they could feel it, the weight of memory. The Retaliation Company left Galanterax untouched. They would not kill him. They would not worship him. They had come not to judge, but to remember aloud, so that someone, even for a moment, could hear. And perhaps, somewhere inside that armor of ruin and ruinous power, a part of Kharn had. The galaxy had forgotten peace. It had forgotten silence. Forgotten the names of those who bled not for glory, but for memory. And in that silence, in the graveyard of empires, walked one who was once a son, once a savior, once a man. Now he was the echo of a storm, the harbinger of blood, the whisper of Khârn's breath made manifest. The siege of Rhadamanth Prime ended before it began. A shrine world fortified with void shields, knight households, and 3 full regiments of the Astra Militarum, reduced to ash in 4 hours. They did not see ships approach, no fleet, no orbital bombardment, only Kharn, and behind him, the World Eaters who still followed, the ones who no longer remembered their names. They fell upon the cathedrams and reliquary halls like wolves with fire in their bellies. Chaplains were slaughtered mid-sermon. Nuns flayed as they clutched icons of the emperor. Even the walls of the basilica seemed to bleed. But Khârn did not stop to kill. He walked. He moved through the carnage like a man late for a funeral, as if the violence around him were merely an obligation, not a purpose. And when he reached the altar of the Basilica Imperialis, he lifted Gorechild, still etched with the blood of 1,000 years, and carved the final line into the reliquary floor. Rage is a weapon, not a master. The sky above Rhadamanth split open. Reality groaned, and the stars wept ichor. For what Khârn did next had not been foreseen by gods nor demons. He turned his chain axe upon his own. The world eaters around him, those who howled with joy at slaughter, who wore Khârn's mark across their chests and burned names into their skulls, fell to his wrath. No words, no sermons, only one last purge. Of them, of himself. He fought for 10 days and nights alone beneath the broken dome of the basilica. It is said the ground was slick with blood for miles, that Khârn did not eat, did not sleep, did not stop, until the last of them, his own brothers, was dead. And when he stood in silence, surrounded by the corpses of those who once marched beside him, he removed his helm for the first time in centuries. His face was not what the Imperium imagined, not fanged, not monstrous, not even wrathful, just tired. It was then that the Legion of the Voltrex Requiem returned. Captain Kester found him kneeling beside a throne of broken weapons, wounded beyond healing. His armor cracked, his axe shattered, his voice silent. Kester did not speak. He placed a single relic beside him, the same iron nameplate he had offered once before, and beside it, a crown of rusted metal and bone, a crown of skulls, not made for kings, but for mourners. Khârn took it in silence, held it in his gauntleted hands, and then, with hands slick in his own blood, he crowned himself, not in triumph, not in madness, but in remembrance. And as the shrine world burned, and diamonds screamed from the torn veil above, Khârn sat upon the mountain of the dead and closed his eyes. No one knows what became of him. Some say he vanished, taken by Khârn in reward or punishment. Others claim he wanders still, killing not for blood, but for silence. The Inquisition declares him destroyed. The Ecclesiarchy forbids his name. The world eaters no longer speak of him. For even monsters feel shame. But somewhere, among the ruins of a dead shrine, a broken crown remains, and beside it, one nameplate, tarnished, but untouched by fire. For he was not the betrayer. He was the last to remember that rage once was wielded in defense of hope, not as a curse, but as a choice.